Hi everyone! Welcome to the Youngster Studio, where we bring guided art activities to you at home. My name's Jill McLennan. I'm a senior teaching artist for the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. Today, we're going to use natural materials that we've collected to create art. You're going to make a few different types of arrangements and then create a final composition with a message for the environment. This presentation will take about 20 minutes, but you can go ahead and take more time for yours at home. Prior to beginning the activity, visit a natural area near your home. Look around and think about what types of materials are available there. Collect a small bag of about 10 to 20 objects to bring home. Leave them out in the sun for a day or two to dry out before returning to the activity. You will also need a cardboard surface, a selection of those materials to use for the compositions, a few strips of paper like this, and a pencil to write with. A few questions to consider. What types of materials did you collect? Well, let's see. I collected a couple of interesting sticks, some different types of pine cones, and some pieces of what they call puzzle bark in interesting shapes. What do you notice about the materials that you collected? Well, I was noticing that the pine cones were different types, but also in different condition. For example, this one is intact, and this one appears to have been eaten. And this one is very round and perfect, whereas this one appears to have been maybe stepped on or crushed in some way. I'm more interested in these pine cones that have been damaged because they tell more of a story for my artwork. How can we create art with a message? Well, we'll get to that as we go along. First, let's look at the artist who inspired this project, Andy Goldsworthy. Andy grew up on a farm in northern England. He was born in 1956. As a child, he became fascinated with nature. He attended art school, but realized that he'd rather be outside in nature. He began to create sculptures that reflect nature's cycles, using natural materials in their original location. His works are impermanent. They change over time with the seasons and the weather. Goldsworthy examines the environment where he's working, looks at all of the shapes and textures of the natural elements, and challenges the principles of balance and movement as he builds his sculptures. Here is a photo of Andy Goldsworthy working on his installation for the museum. You can find this and other resources on our community resource page in the Get Smart with Art curriculum for high school. Now let's look at an installation that Andy Goldsworthy built. Drawn Stone. Drawn Stone was created as a commission for the entryway to the De Young Museum's new building in 2005. Goldsworthy used stone from his hometown of Yorkshire, England, to create the entryway with large stones that people can sit and climb on. A crack in the stones leads visitors on a winding path towards the entrance to the museum. This crack shows that the strength of the stone is impermanent. The crack also represents a fault line, a gentle reminder of the earthquakes of San Francisco's past and of what may happen in the future. The artwork challenges our perceptions of what is art and highlights the power of nature to persist. To begin with, spread out your materials in front of you and take a look at their different qualities. We're going to think about two elements of art to begin: line and shape. I could arrange my objects into a line. I have some that are more linear here. Or I could arrange them by lining them up. I could also organize them by similar shape, like these two are similar shape here, and these are similar shape over here. or I could create them into some kind of a shape. I think these nice linear objects could make the sides of a shape, and then the top and the bottom of a rectangle or a square. Then I could place this pine cone here in the center as a focal point. Now I have my first composition. I'm going to label it with my element of art shape here. Then I can document it by taking a picture with my camera, sketching a picture like this, and also thinking about these 3 questions before I move on. What do you notice about this arrangement? Well, I notice how these objects create a frame around the pine cone. What is surprising about this composition? I'm surprised by how these different objects have so many textures, and yet they work well together to create this square shape. What would you like to do next? I think in my next design, I'd like to include a few more objects, maybe get a little more complicated. Okay. Next, we're going to clear the surface again. This time, we're going to think about the principles of design. Here, I've chosen 2 principles of design: balance or symmetry and movement. To demonstrate movement, you could line up some of your objects and then just slightly tilt each one so it appears to be creating a line of movement across the page, showing motion in your composition. For balance or symmetry, we're going to think about the whole rectangle and then divide it in half, and everything that we place on one side is going to be balanced by something we place on the other side. So these 2 objects are not quite symmetric, but they're balanced enough to create a sense of symmetry. So 1 on each side. And then these 2, again, are not exactly the same, but similar enough. I'm going to put 1 on each side here, like this. And then if I look at my pine cone, if I was to divide it in half this way, it is pretty symmetric on each side. I can place that here in the middle and then tuck everything in so that they're supporting each other. Finally, I'm going to add my puzzle bark. 1 here and then 1 here to be symmetric, and then here and here to create symmetry. So here I could label my composition symmetry, the same on both sides. Again, I could document it by taking a picture. Next, I want to write a word list of words that come to mind when I'm looking at my composition. So I wrote down the word central because there's this central object here in the middle. I feel a sense of balance from my composition. I feel like many of these shapes are similar, and yet they're unique. And then finally, I think of my composition as very supportive, as these 2 verticals are supporting this central line of pine cones. So here is my word list. Then finally, I'm going to think about those questions again. What do you notice about this composition? Well, like I said, I noticed that these 2 vertical sticks appear a little bit human-like to me because of this head shape here, seem to be holding up this row of pine cones in a very supportive way. What is surprising about this composition? Well, actually, I'm surprised by the idea of balance in this composition, and it makes me think about imbalance. Also, it makes me think about the differences between balance in nature and balance in art. Going back to the place where I found these objects, this beautiful site in the Sierra foothills with tall, tall trees and warm sun. It's a very picturesque, almost perfect seeming place. But as I noticed, nature is not perfect. It's constantly changing. So first, let's think about balance in art. So we've talked about balance in art as being placing one thing over here and then one thing over here, giving equal consideration to each part of my surface. But balance in nature is not equal. Each creature depends on another creature for survival and food. This food chain, if it's interrupted, affects all animals, plants, and insects. Human impact on the earth has created an imbalance in nature. I think we're starting to find some meaning in these objects after all. So I'm going to go ahead and change the title of my composition to Balance in Nature. There. Let's keep going. So clear the surface one more time. And to rearrange our objects this final time, we're going to think about our previous arrangements as well as how to create meaning from our objects. Why am I making this? What are these things telling me about my environment? What is my message? Looking at my previous arrangements and thinking about the environment where I found them, I want to create a composition that speaks to nature's cycles of balance and the imbalance of human impact. How can I show all of this in one composition? I can arrange the objects, like these linear objects, to create the mountain where I found the objects, where I found them to begin with, into a triangle like that. Then I have these two pine cones, which are, although both pine cones, they are not similar or the same at all. So placing one on each side can create a balance in composition, but maybe show that imbalance in nature as they teeter on the sides of the mountains. And finally, I have my puzzle bark, which I'm going to use to create a pathway showing the human footprint on the earth. Here is my final composition. And now I'm going to give it a title that helps to explain my meaning. Be aware of the beautiful mountains. Next, I'm going to write a sensory poem about my experience. A sensory poem is a descriptive poem about a place or an experience that includes all 5 of the senses. I see a beautiful mountain. I hear the birds singing. I smell the pine sap. I taste the fresh air. I feel exhilarated and curious. I almost feel like I'm back there in that beautiful place. Now I could document my composition and my poem and send it to somebody in this mail, snail mail or email, to share. What elements of art or principles of design did you use in your final composition? Well, I've used the element of shape to create my triangle for my mountain. And I've used the principle of balance to show this balance in art and imbalance in nature. What did you learn about your environment from using the materials that you've collected? Well, I've learned that the environment is constantly changing. And for example, the pine cones. A pine cone could fall from the tree and land on the ground, and then it might get crushed or stepped on by a human. It might get eaten by maybe a squirrel, or it might grow into a new tree. So therefore, when I'm finished with this project, I'm going to go ahead and return my objects to nature so that they have a chance to fulfill their purpose. How is your artwork a metaphor for a larger idea about the environment? My artwork shows that nothing stays the same in nature, and that you need to take care of the environment so that everything can survive and grow. Now that I have completed my composition and documented it, I will return my objects back to the place where I found them. You can go ahead and continue to experiment with your objects until you find a satisfying composition and a message for your environment. Then document it and share it with someone before returning your objects to the place where you found them. Thanks for joining us. Tune in every Friday for more DeYoungster Studio sessions from the DeYoung's Museum Education team. I'm Jill McLennan, Senior Teaching Artist. Until next time.